Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. KJ. I am here with you all this evening, and I'm so excited that you've decided to join Living the Liberated Life with Dr. KJ. As you know, we always try to be sure that we have shows that will help us to live our lives in a more liberated way. From whatever is keeping us bound, from whatever is keeping us constrained from the things in this world, in our lives, whatever it is, we want each and every one of you that is joining us, friends and family, to live life in a more liberated way, to be your authentic self and to walk in your authenticity. And so our last show, we dealt with fashion and faith. And tonight, we want to talk about homelessness. Hope in homelessness, guys. We want to talk about hope in homelessness because several years ago, for some reason, the Lord laid in my heart the plight of those individuals that are experiencing homelessness and that are out in the cold during the winter months. When I was working at different churches, I started out just collecting socks, and we called it the hot sock drop. And we began to collect socks for the homeless, and we would go out and share. That grew, and we began to go out and share meals with individuals. And then when I moved to another church, that even expanded, and we called it extended grace. And at midnight, we would go out into the streets and we would minister to the young men, the young women that would be in the streets on the trains of New York City. And that was a powerful movement. We would bring 50 some odd young people and adults, and we would just go out into the streets, ministering to people, giving people food, giving people coats, giving people blankets, socks, toiletry. We even expanded it to toiletries for women and for men. And it was a powerful movement. And then, as the Lord would have it, this young lady, our guest tonight, crossed my path, and I came to know that she works with the homeless population. She is a leader in the movement to bring awareness to the homeless, the plight of the homeless in our city and in the communities all across this nation. And so this young lady is a little sister beloved. She is a powerful force in and of herself. She's a young woman, HBCU grad, a daughter, a auntie. She is a leader in the AME Zion Church, and she is just doing it. Can you say doing it? This is a sister beloved who has her own movement. This is the I Am She movement, and she is she indeed. And so tonight, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce to some, present to others, none other than Dr. Dr. Zalex Rivera. She is joining us. Let me bring her on in, family. Hey, Dr. Zalex, Dr. X, how are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Great to see you. And thank you for joining me tonight. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself to my friends, my family, the folks that are watching. Introduce yourself in your own special way.
Absolutely. So I always tell people that I'm a regular girl from the Bronx. I'm also the Chief Program Officer of Housing Solutions of New York currently. We serve a population of anywhere between Department of Homeless Shelters to emergency housing programs for persons living with HIV and AIDS. And then we have smaller grant-funded programs that also assist with comprehensive services. But outside of that, like you said, HBCU grad, product of a single mother, product of the AME Zion Church, and I'm a dog mom.
Let's talk about the dog mom. Okay, I love it. I love it. I'll take it. Talk to me. What's your dog, your fur baby's name? Tell me the baby's name.
His name is Blue, and that's why I have to always make sure I have this ear pod in, because any minute now he'll walk in here or jump in the camera or something. So that's why I was like, oh, let me put my ear pod in.
Okay, well, we want to see Blue. So when Blue comes in, you make sure you give Blue a little.
I'm gonna call him over. I'm like, come, they want to see you.
Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. So now, sis, tell me a little bit about what is it that brought you to this place? What brought you to the place where this is the area that you work?
So this is a real funny story, and I always tell people it's a very cliche story. Only because the only answer for how I ended up in homeless shelter was that God put me here. And so the reason why that's so cliche is, let's go down memory lane a little bit. When I was an undergrad, at Livingstone College. I majored in English. I thought that I wanted to be a journalist. At that time, we was at war, or we're going into war. I believe it was Afghanistan. Don't really quote me on that. And I realized that I didn't want to be the journalist at war, because that's usually where they send rookie journalists, right? So I was like, okay, let me quickly pivot. I'm also a West Indian, and so I needed employment. And so after graduating, I then started doing college recruitment. Shortly thereafter, then we had like an economic downfall and I lost my job. And I'm like, oh God, what do you do next? Right. So I just have this bachelor's degree in English, don't know what I'm supposed to be doing next. And then I had a friend who worked at Home Base, and Home Base is homeless prevention in New York City. So I was like, oh, I'm telling her my struggles and my woes. And then she's like, oh, well, here's my internal postings. And so she sent me the internal postings. And then I saw something called housing director. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about shelter. I knew nothing about housing. I was living at home with my mother. And then I was like, oh, let me apply for this. And literally went to the interview. First job, got it. I had the best supervisor ever. I was a 235 men facility on Ward's Island, which most people would be very scared of. But I literally loved every moment of it. I mean, I was there 14, 16-hour days, some days. I was there on Saturdays. I was bringing my mother to do the bulletin boards. It was just like, I love to hear it. And so that's why I tell people that God put me there, because it's not as if I, was growing up and I was like, oh, I'm going to help the homeless, or, oh, what are the services for the homeless? It was more like, God, what do I do next? And he said, you're going to do this. And that's kind of how I landed there.
And it didn't hurt that you got a paycheck on the other end of that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it was a little paycheck at the time, but I didn't even care. I really enjoyed like the clients and the figuring it out. And my supervisor, we would have lunch together almost every day. And I would just sit there with questions of everything, how the building runs, what are the services to the clients? What are the audits? I just was asking every question I ever could think of, but it was very helpful. Obviously, it got me to where I am today.
And that's the beautiful thing about it, because sometimes God will put us in places, we're just looking for a job. We're just looking for a 9 to 5, and God will put us in places that will help us to define our destiny, right? So that's really a really beautiful thing. So now this has become your passion, dealing with the homeless population.
Yes, it has. And it's a great one. Like, I enjoy it. It's like when we talk about it, people tell me that like it oozes out of me. Like they can see the passion, they can see the flow. Yeah, I can talk about it all day. I mean, it's like unfortunate because it's a horrible topic, but it's a good topic because I can always give solutions.
Right. So let's talk about some of that. So what are some of the things that you see what is the current state of homelessness in New York City? Let's start with New York City, because I don't think people really know, particularly those of us that live in the boroughs, right? I don't think we really know. There's an area in Queens where we see a whole lot of homelessness. There's an area in Manhattan. In every borough, there's an area that we know, oh, that's where the homeless people are. And a lot of times, I can say that when I've done the Extended Grace Endeavor, that ministry, we've gone to Manhattan. But when I was up in Mount Vernon at the church in Mount Vernon, we could have gone right down the street to a place in Mount Vernon, right? Gone to the Bronx. We could have gone to Queens. We could have gone so many places to do this. So let's talk about what does it look like right now in New York?
So the funny part is this is a really tricky question based on what happened last week, right? But I can just give you the overall viewpoint of homelessness. So I always tell people as of lately that we're not in a homeless crisis. We are in a housing crisis. And because we're in a housing crisis, it is making the homeless population more of a concern. But also we're coming to hopefully towards the tail end of the humanitarian crisis. So it's almost like a trifecta here, right? Like it's a bunch of crises happening at the same time. But inflation. So because of inflation, when you look at the native New Yorker, it's very hard to live here. Okay.
Yes.
Rent, the fair market value of rent in New York City based off federal guidelines is anywhere between $2,100 to $2,500 in the Bronx by itself. However, If you can find an apartment for $2,000 to $2,100, more than likely you're not too far from the projects or the hood, and therefore that's not always sustainable. And so, because
We're
of the
talking
cost of
about,
living going up, say it
and when
again.
we're talking about a 1-bedroom apartment. We're talking about a studio.
A
What are we talking
studio.
about?
It depends. So the 1 bedroom for the fair market value in New York City as of HUD about 2 months ago was about 2,100 for a one
Mm,
bedroom. However, a 1 bedroom can go for an easy 3,000, right? In some areas, easy 3,000,
wow.
easy. If you get a 2 bedroom, now you're at 3,500, 3,700. So all of that goes into play. Then when you look at the cost of living, the cost of groceries, the cost of transportation, the cost of children, the cost of education, when you put all that together, New York City is just a hard city. So the native New Yorker is struggling with that, as it relates to trying to find services, find jobs that are meeting the cost of living, right? It's very hard to try to find a job, especially if minimum wage does not suffice this city. And so you're trying to find a job to sustain. And then I can give you some bureaucracies, but I feel like we'll go down that later as it relates to how the more you do better in life, the less the system is there to help you. And so
Absolutely.
therefore it constantly keeps you in the level of bureaucracy, and it keeps you in the system. So that's the first part of it, right? The whole housing crisis. Then add a humanitarian crisis to that. We had over 100,000 persons enter into our city. They were bussed here. People probably have seen the news. They were bussed here, whether that was from Texas or wherever they were bussed from. A lot of them are seeking asylum. A lot of them aren't, right? And so we're just navigating that space in regards to they now have entered the shelter system, potentially making it a very unique process.
Yeah.
Um, Making it did not break the system, because obviously we're New York tough, but it was very close to shattering the system, and that could have
Mm,
had a huge impact on the native New Yorker. And so now
yeah.
you have the native New Yorker, now you have the New Yorker, um, and you just make all of that. You just put all that together. So that's the current state of where homelessness is across the board.
And so what borough would you say, I'm speaking, what borough do you think is being impacted the most by this trifecta?
The Bronx, right? The Bronx is the most affordable, quote unquote, borough out of the five. And so because of that, they get a lot of either the programs as it relates to shelter, supportive housing. They get a lot of the persons coming in because they've already had these shelter populations there. I would
Mhm.
also say that Queens gets a good portion of it, but the Bronx gets the most because Queens also has a lot of commercial hotels. So Queens, by JFK and things of that nature, they have all of
Okay,
those like
and LaGuardia, we
Hampton
have
Inns.
both, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
look, all those, family inns, palm inns, metro inns, whatever the names are, right? And
Quality
so
Inns, yeah.
quality inns,
Yeah.
and so because of that, those have converted into shelters, right? Commercial hotel shelters, sanctuary facilities, emergency shelters. And so I would say between Bronx would be one and then Queens would be two.
Wow, interesting. And what demographic would you say is most impacted as far as the native New Yorker,
Mhm.
as far as age wise? What would you say is most?
So it's not really an age, it's kind of like a population. So families with children are the highest population in the shelter system. And then second to that, obviously, is single adult men. Families with children are usually impacted because of the cost of living. And so, if you have one, two, three, four, five children, you're unable to sustain in housing, particularly making minimum wage or really anything under $50 an hour, right? You're not really going to be able to sustain, or it's going to be really hard to do so. And so a lot of times it's families with children under
Wow.
18, just so you know.
Wow. Wow. And then you said next is single men.
Yeah, single men, absolutely. So single men, whether that's being discharged from an institution such as incarceration or a hospital, um, based on my research, I can only speak to men particularly are most likely to get put out of residencies with their families, or have to then find ways to survive when they hit certain ages. So around the ages of 18 or 19, more families are prone to put out the 18-year-old nephew than they
Yeah.
are to put out the 25-year-old female niece, right? So
Right.
because of that, you do have a lot of men that enter into the shelter system, and then they I don't want to say they struggle with finding independence, but it's much harder for them to really get resources because in some regards they're a man, right? And they're supposed to figure it out. And it doesn't matter what
Right.
kind of upbringing you have. At the end of the day, if you're a man, you have somehow been told to figure it out. And
Yeah.
because of that, they typically don't utilize as many resources as women may use, because they don't ask or they don't open their mouth or they don't talk about any complaints or grievances they may be having. And then that causes a huge impact on the success rate in shelter or in the system as a whole.
So would you say that with homelessness, based on your research, based on your experience, would you say that,
Mhm.
well, let me just go here. Many of us, right,
Yeah,
we think, oh, they're homeless. We
they're
make,
bums.
right, they're bums, and we make it synonymous like they're crazy.
Hmm.
Ed, how would you, I don't know if you were able to hear me.
No, I
Did you
got
hear?
you. I heard you. I heard the part about them being bums and being addicted. So the stereotype is very much media driven. Very
Mhm.
much media driven. The same way the humanitarian crisis was very much media driven, right? It was very much like, oh, they're just, parasites in our neighborhoods. Oh, they're just
Mhm.
all on drugs. Oh, they're just, it's actually not the truth. When you enter into a men's facility, honestly, anywhere between 10 to 15% of that population is actually that stereotype, and everybody else is a working, regular looking, um, average New Yorker. Like it's
Right.
really no different. They have all they do is sleep there. They get up, they get haircuts, they're looking for work, they go to their parents' houses, they still have connections in the communities. Um, Regular paying, tax paying in some regards. Sometimes even working adults. It's just that you can't afford the cost of living. So again, the large population that you see on TV, it's all TV, right? They're not all bums. And honestly, when you look at the comparative thought process of, oh, they're on drugs, you also have to look at it from a perspective of they could have got on drugs after the fact, right? Not
Right.
drugs
Right.
may
Right.
not have contributed to them being.
Right.
However, if you are in the state of survival,
Mhm.
what I don't want to say what else would you do, but like if you're in a state of survival, I say to people, let's say, well, all of us can relate to a toothache, right? We all can
Of
relate
course.
to that.
Mhm.
So you have a toothache, which can be the worst pain. It shoots up to your brain and blah, blah, blah. It is much easier in the United States of America to get heroin than it is to get prescription medication you need or to see a doctor.
My God.
And
Yeah.
so if you have this shooting pain in your head and you haven't eaten and you are trying to survive and there are no resources that you know about, but the drug dealer is readily right here. He even comes to you, right? He or she even
Yeah.
comes to you. You're going
He
to stop the
delivered.
pain. Yeah, you're going to stop the pain. And so
Yeah.
sometimes we have to look at it to get a better understanding. Like, no, they might not have ever been on drugs prior to being homeless. They were probably in school trying to do the best, and maybe a fire happened. But
Mhm.
here they are trying to go through the bureaucracies and the systems that we have in place. And each layer of this system, as much as we are the largest, most strongest system in the country, New York, and with LA, but it's still a process. And every time you go through that process, you relive the fact that you don't have. And so
Absolutely.
because you relive that, after a while, you're going to stop doing that. Right?
Yeah.
There's only about so many times I'm going to tell you somebody hit me over the head before you finally give me a band-aid.
Right.
Then I'm just
Right.
going to find CVS. And so that's why we have to think about it like, okay, drugs could have been a response to it, not the
Right.
cause of it.
Right. Right.
Same
Right.
thing with
Right.
mental health. I always
Yeah.
compare the mental health that we all were a little edgy during COVID, right or wrong.
Absolutely.
COVID gave some of us anxiety after the fact. We all might be germaphobes, now we anxiety. Some people did end up with diagnoses after because of a pandemic. It's not like it was laying dormant. It's a response to an experience. And so you could have been a working adult, everything was fine, everything was good. Now you come up on hard times and now you find yourself anxious, or now you have the diagnosis
Yeah.
of whatever it is. So it's not to say, oh, you must have had it already prior to
Mm-hmm.
coming. No, it happened when I had to sign 77 pages twice before I even got a case manager, before I
Wow.
even was ever eligible for anything.
Wow. So let's talk about that. So I'm homeless,
Yes.
right? I'm a homeless female, and I'm come to a shelter. What does that
It
look
doesn't
like?
work
How?
that way. You can't come to the shelter. So first you have to end up in New York City. You have to, whatever your family composition is, you have to go to a certain intake center. So
Mhm.
if you're saying you're a single adult woman, there are women intake centers that, I want to say there are 3, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the 5 boroughs. For example, like Franklin Women's Shelter, you would have to go to the assessment shelter first. When you get there as a single woman, you do the assessment. They, how are you here? Why are you here? What's your name? All that kind of great stuff. Hopefully you have paperwork, right?
And
And then
if it
from,
was a fire that caused me to be homeless, I may not have paperwork, right?
you may not.
Right.
They will take you based off what you say initially, and then actually or try to navigate you in assessment to get the paperwork. So they may try to work with you about going to Social Security or working it out, because they can give you a residency letter once you enter the system to try to navigate that with you, or getting a New York City ID. But they would do the intake, put you in the system, and then from assessment, then you get placed at a shelter. So, and it could be, at the end of each night, all of these intake centers have to finish their intakes. They can't not finish. You can't spend the night overnight in intake. You have to be able to be matched to a shelter, and then they'll transport you to the shelter. And it could be in all 5 boroughs. So it could be any borough. So you could walk in there and say, listen, I want to be in Queens. My doctor's in Queens. My church is in Queens. In Queens, they're like, yeah, but we got room in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. So you going to Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Wow.
Or you going to the
Okay.
north side of the Bronx. Because that's where
Wow.
the availability is. And so their job in intake is to match the person with the composition to whatever the available unit is throughout the city.
Okay. And so how realistic is a movie like Pursuit of Happiness?
It's not that realistic in New York City.
Okay.
New York City is a right to shelter mandate city. And so therefore anybody who seeks shelter in our city will get shelter. And it is not cot dormitory shelter. It is
Mm.
actual, again, it depends on the dynamic, right? So, and it's not bunk bed. They did away with bunk beds a couple years ago in shelter. So it is a matter of, you may end up on the single side. It may be a bed and a locker, and it's an actual bed. It is an actual twin size bed. It is not like a pull out cot or anything like that. It's a twin size bed, and there's usually a locker. The lockers are usually 3 feet, but you also have to be 3 feet from the other person. Those are the regulations. But it sometimes is open dormitory, or it could be small dormitory room. So maybe 4 or 5 of you in a room per room, depending on how the building makeup is. And that's on the single side. On the family with children side, everybody gets a unit, meaning you're in an actual closed space.
Okay. So what about like with my husband? God forbid, right?
Yeah, so that's considered, you're considered an adult family, and you also get a unit. So you're, again,
Okay.
the only one that kind of, I guess, looks like Pursuit of Happiness is single adults.
Okay.
But it can vary based on just the makeup or mock-up of that building. But everybody else, you're in a unit.
But do we have the lineup, the whole lineup to see if we
There is
can
no
get in?
lineup, right? You go to assessment, you get in assessment, you'll wait in a waiting area. Then by the time you see whatever the system is or process is there, then you wait in the waiting area again. They get you in a transportation. The shelter that you're going to is made aware from intake that you're coming. So for example, with you, they say, hey, we got Dr. KJ and her husband, they coming and they'll be there. We about to be there. And they'll give me like your information and the rest of your family composition. So when you do show up with your intake paper, I can say, oh, we were already waiting for you. You're already assigned to 4J. Now they'll do another intake with you, which is the part I was saying, that I just got to repeat the same thing, right? So I just said what I said in assessment, and now here you are, Dr. X, and you asking me the same questions that I just answered. And so that's where it gets, a little, annoying.
Yeah.
But yes, but you end up in a unit with your husband. You will
And is
not
there a
end up
different
in a
time?
dorm with
Is there
your
a certain
husband.
time frame? Is there a certain time frame that?
So the city maps it out like we do try to work with people to be out of shelter within the first, within the first year. They've done major changes with trying to get vouchers turned over much faster, try to get you more eligible or get you eligible at a quicker, rapid pace to get you out of shelter. But there really isn't. There's no client responsibilities in the city currently, and that was from the last mayor, not this mayor. And because of that, it's very hard to evict a person out of shelter. The last mayor to have done that is Mayor Bloomberg.
And we just evict them out. And
so Mayor Bloomberg used to have it where you have to show due process, right, with the client. And so they're not compliant, they're not coming to appointments, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And then once it was reviewed by a legal team, then they would be temporarily suspended from shelter services in New York City for up to 45 days, 30 to 45 days. The mindset behind that was like, if you're not going to follow the rules, then you can go sleep in the subway, right? But after the 35 days, you would then come back in, or 45 days, you would then come back in and then have to sign like a contract agreeing to be more compliant to be able to return to services. It sounds a little harsh, but it did get people to comply. Right now, there is not that process. And so because of that, as a human service worker, sometimes you feel like you're in a mouse wheel because you get them to try to comply, but they also know that they don't have to. And so if they don't have to,
right.
Yeah, what are you going to do? You can't put me out.
Mm-hmm.
And so here you are like, well, let's work on housing. Let's stay motivated. Let's keep going. Yeah. So it's tricky.
So what are the tools now that are, how do we help? How do we, those on the outside looking in, how can we assist in this process?
Well, I would definitely say this, because of the change that the United States just had, right?
Very nice. I like the way you said that.
Providers are going to need communities to sustain just basic needs of clients. That person may potentially cut benefits for these clients. We've heard of mass deportations. So it can have a direct impact on that. And so because of that, we're looking for stuff. Right now, it's very promising. Everybody loves to do Thanksgiving dinners. It's Thanksgiving. Everybody loves to do toy drives now, and everybody loves to do like coat drives. But like in January, they still need coats and they still need services. And honestly, any service that you can think of, a provider needs, right? So whether that's, I can tell you from experience, the most needed thing, let's say with men, right, in shelter, are underwear and socks. Don't ask me the underwear part, but the sock part is because they typically are walking a lot, right? They're typically the ones that you're seeing panhandling. They're typically the ones that have to constantly walk and figure it out for their family. So, and like razors, right? And so in the middle of February, if you decide to sponsor some haircuts, that would be appreciated. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, it could be something that simple. Or I give ideas sometimes to people, and I've been trying to work on this for a couple of years, where families in shelter never get family portraits. And that's something some of us take for granted, right? We have smartphones, you get your family together, we all take a picture, we blow it up. They don't get that option. They never get a picture with their family. They never get family dynamics like that.
I love it. This is
so it's like, hey, if you know a couple photographer friends and you partner with some of these shelters, we can set up in some of the community spaces to have picture day. And then work with local barbershops and hair salons to get these kids' hair combed. That's another idea. It can be something as simple as better cooked food outside of Thanksgiving, right? Everybody right now is giving somebody a Thanksgiving meal.
So
But
how do they eat then? What is the
no, so
process
we
of
give them food. You get catered. Well, let me take that back. Tier 2 shelters, which means tier 2 means that you have cooking amenities in your facility. So most family with children locations have cooking amenities. And so the family would then have their food stamp benefits. They go grocery shopping. They can pay for their own meals. But on the hotel side, like I was talking about in Queens, they get catered meals. And that can literally go from cold breakfast for a couple weeks to 2 hot dogs, 2 buns, and tater tots.
No.
And you're a 50-year-old woman with your kids, and that's the meal, right? Or
That
just
our city is giving. Okay.
no, not the city. No. The provider. Every provider has their own contracted services. The city does not
Gotcha.
give the meals.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
and so we have our own contracted services. And then when you get the contracted service, it all depends on what their budget is, right? So one person may be given chicken and rice, but if your budget calls for 2 hot dogs and tater tots, and that's what you're providing. But it would be great if sometimes in the middle of March, somebody just decided they want to do a spring dinner, right? Like just do spring dinner, like something so that they can eat a cooked meal in some of these commercial hotels.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Okay. And so you said for the men, we need to look at socks and
Socks,
underwear and
underwear.
those are 3 things for men. What are 3 things for women?
You ready for this? Sanitary napkins.
Absolutely.
Women, oh, I mean, not women, people, I guess, forget, like all of a sudden you're in shelter and they're like, oh, they must not have a menstrual cycle.
Mhm.
But they do. And we do provide them, but I want you to believe that we provide them big, bulky. I don't even think they really absorb
Diapers.
anything. Yeah.
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
But have that kind of initiative. That would be great. Um,
Our last outing, we did that. We did sanitary napkins. That was really good. Yeah. Okay.
especially when you're talking about street homeless individuals. It may
Right.
not always impact, women in shelters, but if you start doing if anybody is interested in doing street outreach, you would think about, like when you do street outreach, you should think about stuff like bringing shower trucks, right? If you wanted to do a day of service or something, if you can find a company that has shower trucks, you'd be amazed at what a shower can do for somebody.
Oh, I know
Right?
what a
Or
shower can do for me after a long day. So I know if I'm home, I already know.
like so
Yeah.
a shower truck, you can bring porta potties to encampments, bring sanitary napkins because you got women living on the street. Where do you think this stuff is happening at? But that was that. So going back to the ones in shelter, children always need toys and activities. Most family with children sites do have recreation, but if you want to partner with them to say, you know what, hey, we want to sponsor the paint party at a shelter, it's well appreciated because maybe my budget doesn't cover paint, right? But it would be great to partner and things of that nature. Haircuts, washing sets, anything that you could think of that you take for granted is well appreciated. They'll line up out the door. They'll sit and wait for it.
I love it. I love it. And then how would we go about something like that?
It's all about relationships, right? Everybody says your net worth is your net worth. Did I flip that? Either way.
Is your net worth, yeah.
There we go. One of them. So you connect with people. I know a ton of other providers. I know, but besides me, I have 33 facilities that span between 5 boroughs. And so that's one opportunity. But there's other providers that have these resources. You would reach out to them or get connected to them, and then pitch your idea, right? Just pitch your idea. They'll be open to it. But we don't get a lot of community engagement sometimes across the board outside of Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yes.
And so the rest of the year, it's like, well, what about fathers? I always say that about shelter, families with children shelter. The amount of single fathers that are not addressed or not even acknowledged in our shelter system is disheartening. And so
My
when
Lord.
Father's Day comes, it would be great if like fraternities or what, everybody or just men, right? Just came in and was like, hey, we want to have a Father's Day brunch at your site. Those
Yep.
kind of things would be great because nobody recognizes them, right? They're just
Yeah.
trying the best they can because, everybody thinks
And we
about
kind of
Mother's Day.
do the extremes, right? We'll do
Correct.
the jail. We'll go to jail.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Rikers will have that, but we don't do it in this space, right? So yeah,
And they
that's
need to be empowered. Like I need everybody to kind of visualize the fact that, and it doesn't always have to be just a hardship. It can also just be, and I'm not saying not just a hardship, a financial hardship. It could be a natural disaster. And that's why I always tell people we cannot 100% eradicate homelessness because you cannot control Mother Nature when she's not in the mood. Okay.
that's
And
right.
so because of that, if that person had a fire and they had a slumlord, by the time they wait for the federal government and FEMA and everybody else to kick in, it might be 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're in the shelter. I need you to just imagine you, your husband, and your kid in a room. You see what I'm saying? With the door closed. You cannot be out in the hallways because this is not, you don't pay rent in here, right? So you can't just be running down the hallways. I need to know where you're going if you decide to go on a pass. Where are you taking your children as if
Wait a
I'm
minute,
your
I would
mother?
need a pass. I would need a pass. Let's talk about
Curfew is 9:00. For the first adult, 10:00 for the second adult. And if you're working, I need where you have to prove to me your work schedule. So now this is the part that I always say, just imagine you or anybody who's listening, you are a grown adult and you fell on hard times. But here you come in with shelter with your child, and then you say, oh, my kid going to grandma's house. Okay, cool. What's grandma's name? Where does grandma live? And what's grandma's phone number? You have to produce all of that to me so that I can give you a pass so that you can let your child stay at grandma's house so they'll let you back in every single day. You know how belittling that can come off to people, or how that can make you feel less empowered as a man or a woman first, and now as a parent second. And then I'm saying to you, and by the way, you got to comply with services. You have to meet with your case manager once or twice. Either once or twice a week. You got to save up 60% of your income. You need to, and I'm giving you all of this that you need to do. It's not as simple as people make it seem like, oh, I'd be motivated. No, you would not, because your kid as a single adult is on the bunk bed above you. Right? So that 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, he up there and you right here. You can't have a TV past 25 inches. Who has a TV?
In 2024. Because I'm sure there was some that were, but in 2024, let's just put this in perspective. Okay.
Where don't people use that now for like their computer screen? But that's the part that people have to think about when so that's the part that people have to think about. It's not just, oh, well, if I was homeless, I would just follow all the rules. I tell people all the time, if I was homeless, I would be the most non-compliant client ever. You're not going to tell me that if I want to go see my man, I got to tell you where he lived and his name. And I'm not doing that. See, I'm not, or my kids.
So with that, could a man come in?
No, you can't have visitors. Oh, and I also tell you can't have pets. Okay.
So Blue is not the question.
I'm making it worse.
Yeah, so Blue just can't be there.
Blue, so I'm a dog mom. I'm going to go to a place I need shelter. You tell me Blue can't be there. What you think I'm going to do? Drop him off at the nearest kill shelter? I'm not. We're going to go sit outside.
What happens to the pets? Like, that's something I never thought about.
You have to give your pet to the shelter, to the animal shelter.
Wow.
So, or I would then need to register Blue as a support animal. And if he doesn't qualify, that means I got to go see a psych. I got to get the psych to, say I got some type of whatever. And this is
And
what,
that could be days and
or
weeks.
register him as an emotional animal, which also means I go to psych and I have to tell them, you know, I get sad, bad anxiety if I don't have my dog. But that can be a process, right? So I'm homeless today, right now.
That's what I'm
Okay,
saying. So this
something
is days and weeks. You have no place to sleep with Blue, and days and weeks. I have my appointment December 3rd.
correct. Well, now I found out about this, and now you're telling me. So me and Blue, I gotta go find an appointment, right? And you know, nowadays most of these doctors they only 9 to 5, 10 to 6 anyway. So I hope I don't have a job because what I'm gonna do take off because I also have to take off of work to go do intake all day.
So
Then
now
once
you're
I
gonna
get
be
in the
homeless and
shelter,
jobless.
yep, yep.
Wow.
And so the simplest things is that goes back to the part where you like, how can community help? The simplest things that you could think of make people feel appreciated, right?
And not
I don't,
forgotten. Yeah. And so
and not forgotten.
Tigger Man Productions says, let's set up a picture day. This is Kevin Grimes. So
Got you.
check this out. I'm sitting here thinking, you know, my wheels are turning. Like I already am like, after I get off of here, I'm like, okay, let me send this message to my photographer person. Let me set up, you know, I'm like, all right, where the barbers that I know, let's say, like, I feel like, you know, with Liberated to Love, we always, as we want to live more liberating lives and do these things, these are the ways in which we can help our communities. And for a long time, to your point, you were sharing that people are always giving food and goods, Christmas time, Thanksgiving. And I said, look, we need to get some water and some sandwiches and things like that. And we need to do this during the summer because people are hot. They want to be cool. You know what I mean? Let's get a bunch of fresh white teas, right? In
Yeah.
different sizes and give people these things. Like it's. I remember one day, I had some frozen. You know how you get these frozen meals? I'd gotten them for my parents, and they didn't like them, right? But they were decent meals. You know, they
Right.
were. You know, and you know, we can review them. You know, they went. This has no taste. You know what I mean? Like it was that whole thing, but it was pasta, it was, you know, chicken, beef, you know, all sorts of things. And one day it just, you know, dropped in my spirit like, I'm not going to eat these. My parents are not going to eat them. I warmed up all of them. I had to have about 12, 15 of them. Warmed up all of them. Got water bottles. I told my then boyfriend, now my husband, right? I had him I was like, let's get some fruit. Let's get some bottles of water. We got some utensils. We got all of that. And we just drove down Sufton Boulevard in Jamaica Avenue in Queens. And there's a park that all the homeless folks live. So as we're driving down, you know, I'm seeing people and, you know, just like, hey, sis, are you hungry? And to see their heads turn around, you know, one man, he popped up like toast, like as soon as he heard hungry, I was just like, I got you, you know, and we just gave them the food. The food was warm. The food they had fruit. It was healthy food. It was all of these things, you know, they had water. And I think I gave them like something else because I know, like, listen, after I eat, I'm not a big dessert person. You can't tell by my size, but I'm not a big dessert person. But you know, I know some people that they're like, oh, I gotta have something sweet after I eat. You know, we had like, I think we may have done it maybe a little bit after like Halloween or something. So we had like little candy bars and things like that. And you know, we went out, we fed those people, and just to see the joy in their face, you see the tear in their right? One of the things I told the young people when I was working with the young people, I would always say, imagine going to sleep, praying that you had something to eat. Just praying like, God, I just need something to eat my stomach, and just saying, you know, and you close your eyes, you go to sleep, and when you wake up, there's a bag of food. Know that you are answering somebody's prayer tonight, right? And that is one of the conversations that I have with them. You don't know how this was one night. You're going back home. You're going back home. You're going back to your shower. You're going back to your warm bed. Your mother's good. You know, we're going to have breakfast for you at the church. We have all these things, but you are the answer to somebody's prayer. And so with that, that's a great segue for us for you to share. How do you believe God? And you already said that God brought you to this place, to
Yeah.
work. But tell me how you've seen God move through your journey working with the homeless population.
That's it's such a loaded question. But the thing about me is I'm thankful to God for always keeping me humble and heart connected, right? Because that's what you have to do to service people, right? And in servicing people, you have to be reminded that they're people. And so that's the first part about this, is that I don't care. I do care about how far God takes me, but I say it to say I don't care whatever title I get. I always want to be with the people. And so I'm always advocating for clients. I'm always talking to clients, but it is a joy to see a family get keys
Yeah.
after whatever their story is. So whether that's, I've had clients that's been in shelter 10, 12, 15 years, 5, 6, 7 years, and nobody just listened to them long enough to match them to the right housing so that they can move out. But once they got their keys, right,
Yeah.
the joy that they have. So it's even if, because, in New York City, you have housing placement, everything is data. Even if you don't make your quote unquote placements, for me to tell a mother that this is your apartment
Right.
is the best thing that ever can happen. So when you see that, that's when you're reminded about, God's grace and his mercy. And that's when you're reminded that, like, nah, he definitely put me here. Right.
Mm.
Because there are days when I'm calling realtors and brokers and I'm trying to figure, and this is even from where I'm at now. Like, I'm calling realtors and brokers like, hey, it's tough for all of us. Let's figure it out. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's nothing better than seeing a mother or father or just family composition or even a single adult, just the client itself being able to go into their own place and sustain. The best part
Mm.
is being able to sustain. So having those connections afterwards, making sure that they have community engagements after they go into the apartment. Because I moved into my first apartment, you couldn't tell me where Con Edison was. I didn't even know. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine persons now trying to navigate these systems. And so that's the biggest thing, is that, you're always constantly reminded in these success stories of God's grace and mercy.
And how often do those success stories come back to you and share with those that may be in shelter?
It happens a lot, ironically. I only said ironically because, we're in the day of social media. And, as a human service worker, you kind of have this concept that's like once a client, always a client. And that's just only to kind of maintain boundaries and professional wheelhouse. But you see them online, or they'll reach out eventually because they'll have your email, and then they'll send you like pictures of their family or their kids later down the line. I've even hired clients that I've had in the past. Like, so they've
Mm-hmm.
moved out of shelter and then they've got on their feet and they've either gone back to school or something. And then I've hired them as case
Nice.
managers now at this point, because you now have the lived experience that can make you a better clinician. And so because
Love
of that, I try to give back in that regard.
I love it. I love it. Now we're getting ready to wrap up. Somebody sent a nice, lovely heart for you. Um, and I'm going to wrap up. But before we wrap up, you know how I end my shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to give you a second to think about it, ponder it as I do my closing remarks, and then I'm going to
Okay.
turn it back over to you. And so the question that I ask, the way I close my shows, is I ask you, what is your last liberating thought? All right. So that's for you to think on. And family, I want to thank those of you that joined us, those of you that will be watching in the replay. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I believe tonight was rich. I believe some of us have gotten some new ways in which we can be extensions of God's hands here in the earth. I believe that there are going to be some photos. There are going to be some drives where we are feeding the homeless. We are going out there and helping those that are without homes in this season. And that is my prayer. That is what this particular show is all about, us being able to be aware. Nothing will help. We can't help if we don't know. And so
Yeah.
now you know. And so now it's up to you to go and grow. And so, family, with that being said, we have a few other episodes that we are planning for the new year. I may do one or two more in December, but as of now, I want each of you to enjoy your holiday season and think about, get with your families, think about ways in which you all can be a blessing to somebody else, not just for Christmas, not just for Thanksgiving, but all year through. All right. And so now, Doctors Alex, what is your
So
final liberating thought tonight?
my final liberating thought is to everybody to remember that homelessness is a response to trauma already experienced. So be kind.
I love that. And is there anything you're working on that you'd like to share as we close out?
No, not right now. Right now. Oh, let me take that back. I take it back. I just launched a permanent supportive housing program October 1st. And so
Nice.
people who are watching, who might be a landlord or a broker, if you're interested in partnering, that would be great. People need housing. So let's focus on our housing crisis here in the city and how we can all support each other.
I love that. Congratulations. We're looking forward to ways in which we can also partner with you. And I'll be on the phone with you later on another day so that we can talk about which shelter we're going to be in and where we're going to be working. All right. So
All
I
righty.
thank each of you for joining us tonight. And as I always say, live liberated. Good night.